Hello everyone. Today we're going to go over some of the basics of NetApp auditing. Now to start, what is NetApp? The NetApp filer, also known as NetApp Fabric Attached Storage, is a type of disk storage device which owns and controls a file system and present files and directories over the network. It uses an operating system called Data on Tap. And how is it accessed? NetApp Filer is a cloud-hosted environment, but acts similar to an on-premise file share, where accessing this will involve an IP address or file server name, and then the file share. What do we audit through NetApp? File and folder modifications are captured similar to what standard file server auditing captures. These include successful changes, successful reads, failed change access, and failed read access. Before we can start auditing NetApp, there are quite a few ports we need to configure as seen in this Help Center article. In this case, we need port 389 open for outbound connections on the Netwrix host and open for inbound connections on the domain controller. And the rest of the table reads the same way.
When going through and configuring the NetApp filer for monitoring, be sure to visit the Help Center guide on the NetApp filer itself. There are different versions at which that the NetApp filer could be set in, so depending on which version that the customer has it set for, you want to utilize the link that it goes to. There is the configuring audit settings for CIFS file shares. There's then also the configure NetApp data on tap 7 and 8 in 7 mode for monitoring, or configure NetApp cluster data on tap 8 and on tap 9 for monitoring. Which out of the three, I found that the on tap 9 to be the most common, so we'll go into here and take a look. Within this section, it's going to provide other links on the actual guides that go into the ONTAP documentation centers and other various portions directly, but primarily what's going to be seen is actually the needed for the various configurations on something like the ONTAP web access, which following through the various telnet settings and going through these various portions to confirm that they're set properly will be what you want to then confirm with the customer during this time. After this then there is the configuring firewall policy, which then the needed commands depending on which version you have will be here shown below. After this point you then go into configuring of the event categories in the log, which the event categories is then going to be under the first drop down here. And again, through the means of the telnet commands that you see below, you'll want to then make sure that these are ran to then actually confirm that they're set properly. After this point, you then go into the logs retention period, which is going to require a bit more in regards to the actual reg edit that's seen here. So making sure that this guide has been followed, you'll then want to then go into dealing with the actual account permissions and roles that then can be applied. So going from here, we can head over to the actual section of it within the Help Center here. And for the actual specific domain authenticated account, it needs to have read permission set on the actual audit logs folder and then the contents, as well as then delete permissions that are set on the contents of this folder as well. What is also then needed for the actual audited folders, then read permissions on these for the actual collection account so that it has the ability to access them. What then is needed primarily for the actual ONTAP accounts, which most of the time what's seen is then with the actual ONTAP 9 versions, is the various settings here that you see below. Though one of the nice easy ones, especially for the initial testing, would be to involve the VS admin role, as this one then has the ability to access many things in regards to the ONTAP interface. When going about configuring a NetApp file or monitoring plan, you want to make sure that when selecting the actual item, instead of the computer selection, that you actually hit the NetApp. When doing so, after that you go into the general portion here, which then the IP address, the NetBIOS name, or the FQDN can be used to actually designate the NetApp file server itself. Underneath this point, you then run into the UNC path for the audit logs location. It can be detected automatically, but many times using the actual path location itself is preferred, where you then want to specify it directly on it here if it's then set as the standard etc log, like how you see it here, or if then it was named something different for when you were configuring it before. Otherwise then, for the data collection account, just like how it was before, then the one that's listed just needs to have the read permissions, as well as then delete on some of the various spots of the actual NetApp filer file shares. From here then we go into the OnTAPI portion of this, to where this is going to become a bit more of the specific side of things, to where if there's a separate management interface that is different than the actual SVM server itself for the NetApp filer, then specifying that directly into the field here after selecting the custom radio is what you will want to do. Otherwise, if it's set as the same as the file server, that can be kept as the default. And from here, you have the actual specification for the account connecting to the OnTAPI interface. Many a times this needs to be selected as the special account, where then things such as the VS admin, many a times is actually one that would be a proper account to utilize in the situation, considering it has a lot of the access needs to be able to get to the locations and offer what's needed to do collections properly. From here, going into it, you go into the scope, which then specifying specific shares is best when starting off, as this will reduce the overall amount that's being first collected, especially for the means of testing this initially, just to make sure that it works. And when doing the actual updates on the monitoring plan, I would definitely recommend specifying a few shares at a time, and then as needed, this can be expanded later. Just as you see as well in other occasions too with these, the edit data source option actually then is going to be something that looks very similar to what you find the standard Windows file servers actually then themselves, to where the object actions for the successful changes, failed changes, successful reads, or failed reads can then be selected here depending on what the customer would prefer. Network traffic compression is also an option, as well as the adjust audit settings automatically and your state and times. All of these are things that could be dependent on what the customer would want, so going over this with them would definitely be ideal. Regarding the data flow for NetApp, we can reference standard file server collections for similarities between the two. A snapshot is taken of the file share and compared to the previous one, which provides the what information for the file or folder modification that may have occurred. From here, the means of the event collection is also used to correlate the actual change seen in the snapshot to the event of the user that then made this change. This will provide the who and when information of this change exactly. Though what is different here is the NetApp filer does not have the exact same event log like what is seen with the standard file server. The NetApp filer itself is configured to dump event files into a specific audit log location, where these are then copied from here and over into the Netwrix hosted server. From this point, the collector is then able to parse these event files and go about doing the proper correlation of the actual change to the user, providing it how you see in all of the reports. In regards to NetApp logs and common troubleshooting, one of the files that you're going to want to look for that actually is going to provide a lot of very beneficial information is this specific NWX NetApp change processor text file. Where you're going to find this is actually going to be under the logs, data collection core, and then into the NW file storage SVC folder. Within this then you'll see the NWX NetApp change processor file. Within this file, you will see the collector mentioning that it is copying the event files from the configured log path and then over to the local Netwrix hosted server. Once all of these event files have then been copied over, there will then be entries that the collector is mentioning it parsing these copied files. As these event files can take some time to be fully processed on the back end, there's definitely a possibility that running a search directly after having configured the plan initially could still result in showing no data even though changes were made. What would be recommended here would be to start the collections off and then check this file periodically, as this will allow you to be able to then prove that the collections are in fact working as it's mentioning the things from before. On the other hand, if it were failing, This will also then be able to provide you details of where the collector is in fact failing at during this collection process. So when troubleshooting this collector, please make sure to dig into this file to have a basis to be able to work off of. Lastly, there's always some articles that can be found in the knowledge base regarding NetApp as well. So when trying to troubleshoot some problems, always be sure to look into this location as well.